seems to me, reading some of your testimony, Chris, your job was to make sure your bank customers didn't get any favors from the banks, particularly not when we were in debt. Describe what your job was.
Well, thank you, Laura. Part of, actually, mostly of what I had participated in as a collector at Bank of America, you would have to sum it up as guerrilla collection tactics. Sort of the playbook at Bank of America was to take everything that the collection agencies couldn't do in terms of the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act and employ it on our behalf, thereby violating almost every single rule of the FDCPA.
Wait a minute. So we have a law that applies to collection agencies, but banks can get around that law?
As a first-party debt collector, banks aren't technically obligated to follow that law. However, they're also not obligated to abuse the law. And what Bank of America would traditionally do on a consistent basis is actually abuse the FDCPA.
What do you mean?
For example, one of the things that we would prominently do is if you owed money on a credit card, we didn't necessarily call just you. We actually would call your neighbors. We would call the neighbor to the left of you. We would call the neighbor to the right of you for the sole purpose of ensuring that you, as a neighbor, got a message to the debt collector for us. Sometimes that would involve getting the message to the debtor by sending a kid across the street or sending an old lady across the street. However, we got that message to the customer. Now, the law clearly states, or the FDCPA clearly states, all we can do is confirm the location of the customer or the debtor. However, our intent was to ensure that a message was delivered to the debtor by the neighbor.
So the message, the neighbor would find somebody to run across the street, and the message they would carry is what? Call Chris, he needs your money?
Call Chris at Bank of America. I haven't heard from you in 6 months. It's important that we talk. That would be a similar message, a message that would lead the debtor to believe that we've had very fluid conversations with the neighbor. Sometimes it would go so far as the neighbor would bring the portable phone over to the debtor who might be perhaps mowing their lawn or sitting on their front porch and actually delivering the phone to them. So we would be carrying on a conversation with the debtor on the neighbor's telephone.
Now, you never actually left any dead horses' heads in beds or anything, right?
No, I hopefully it never gets to that point.
What's the incentive for you, Chris, in all of this? You as the call center worker, and then I want to know why you left.
Well, the interest to me is when you take a look at what the country has done in terms of bailing out not just Bank of America but all banks, and this is a bank that gladly accepted the money, but absolutely are fighting any need for reform. They still want to continue the same practices that they're doing. Which potentially, if the banks continue to go unregulated, they're going to wind up in the same boat again.
But that's your incentive as a whistleblower. I want to know what was your reward for getting those neighbors to send those kids to talk to those debtors?
Oh, the rewards were huge. Our salaries were, for example, I hadn't had a pay raise in the last 5 years that I'd worked at the company. However, the bonuses continued to go up. There were times when I was earning in excess of $5,000 to $6,000 a month in bonuses just by hitting and exceeding my collection goal. So there were incentives to ensure that these customers called back, to ensure that they paid on the account. And what you have to understand is I was collecting on accounts that, in most instances, customers hadn't paid on in 6 months. So that meant that the bank really had their backs up against the wall, because if those customers didn't pay us, they actually had to write that debt off as a bad debt, reported as a loss to the public and to the shareholders. So when their backs were up against the wall to that degree, they were absolutely willing to have us go out there on a limb and collect this money at all costs.
Now, quickly, Chris, I know you have one story about an old woman, a story that really ended up kind of turning your stomach on this whole thing.
It did. There was an elderly lady, and I specifically remember her living in Florida. We'd had a conversation, or I had had a conversation with her, and she had suggested that she had nothing left to sell. And she had mentioned that the only thing that she really had left in her home were her appliances. At that point, I took the avenue that she had opened for me and started discussing the option of her selling some of her appliances. We actually wound up with her selling her stove and cooking on a Bunsen burner, so that way she could maintain her credit card debt for the month at Bank of America.
Coming to you, Stephen, there was an effort earlier this year to regulate the banks and exactly these kinds of practice, credit card collection practices, charges, all the rest. What has been done, if anything?
Well, a week ago, we were hopeful that there was going to be a new agency set up that would start to regulate this. The banks, once again, are lobbying. They're really, I think, trying to hold the Congress hostage and saying, if you stop us from doing these practices, we won't make any money and therefore we'll be in trouble. And I think what's really key is what Chris is describing is at every level of the bank, whether you're a teller, whether you're a personal banker, you're incentivized to engage in deceptive practices. You try to get people into overdraft so that you can get their fees, even if you know they won't be able to pay. You give people credit cards and encourage it, even though you don't think they'll be able to maintain it. The system is based on low wages, pressure to sell, and bonuses, and it distorts it at every level. And what's really amazing to us is workers are now saying, I don't want to do this. I don't want to participate, which is why we're saying, one, you need whistleblower protection, so people can't be fired. Second, we should do what they're actually doing in the UK and other parts of the world, change the compensation system, make it illegal to make somebody's wages and jobs be tied to doing things that are deceptive. And third, this is why we think the Employee Free Choice Act is so key, that until workers have unions, they can't be, we think we need to regulate from below in addition to above. And regulating from below means that workers can stand up and say, I'm not going to do that without the fear of getting fired.
You said at the beginning that you were hopeful there was going to be new legislation, the Consumer Financial Protection Act. What's happened to it?
Yesterday, it got delayed now till September in Barney Frank's committee. The banks yesterday sent a letter in signed by 23 organizations ranging from banks to the Building Owners Association, all crying wolf. That, yes, we need reform, but not too quick. It's like healthcare. We need to slow down. Let's not do it right now because their business model is unsustainable.
Now, Max, I almost hesitate to ask this question, but do we know if any of the money that we spent on the bailout, giving them money, that we spent on them in form of bailout, has gone to this kind of lobbying against regulation in the same way that other companies spent so much trying to beat the aforementioned Employee Free Choice Act?
Directly, it's limited. Their direct ability to turn this money into lobbying efforts is limited. And I do think if we're going to be fair, banks are not unique. So General Motors and Chrysler did not waste one penny of their money honoring any of their commitments to the public or workers, nor did any other industry, insurance, etc. And it's hard to expect that in the environment we have. And I think the large reason that the Democratic Party and the Congress has been unsuccessful in these efforts is because not trying is a major handicap. And I think that when the banks were lying on the ground wheezing, they were busy giving them CPR and money, and that they're busy trying to compromise, often even before the banks then make a round of demands to water down these rules. And so that's exactly what we saw with the credit cards. You
don't think the environment has changed at all from last fall to this week?
I think the public's very angry. I think that that's changed a lot. I think that people have a sense of being abused and exploited by the banks. I don't think the banks are much doing things they didn't used to, but they're doing some new things with money that they did get from the public, and that is fairly new. Although they usually just got the money from the public directly. Now we had a middleman, the government, so I'm not sure if it's a sea change. But I think that the combination of not trying and compromising yourself to death and then giving it over to the corporate lobby-controlled Congress in both parties is not a recipe for radical change, and so we didn't get it.